Hello and welcome to a Journal Club by Physicians Association for Nutrition Israel. We are a part of an international organization of professionals, dietitians, physicians, and other health professions, aiming to reduce diet-related diseases, improve lives, and rethink health. One of the ways we chose to do that is by joining hands and getting updated in evidence-based knowledge on how to prevent and treat disease by healthy lifestyle and especially healthy nutrition. So I'm very excited and honored to host Dr. Cody Hanick, who recently earned his PhD in nutrition sciences from the University of Alabama at Birmingham, where his doctoral research focused on the effects of plant-based diets on glycemic control in adults with type 2 diabetes. His dissertation included the study we will be discussing in today's Journal Club, and Brenda Davis, a registered dietitian, a plant-based nutrition pioneer, researcher, and internationally acclaimed speaker. Brenda has authored or co-authored 13 books with over 1 million copies in print and 12 languages and 10 peer-reviewed journal articles. We will have a short Q&A at the end of both presentations by both speakers. Thank you so much, Cody and Brenda, for presenting us your work.
Thanks, Ronnie.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for joining today. Before I get started, I just want to say it's truly a privilege to speak to a group of people who have a particular unifying value, and that value is this, the importance and power of nutrition when it comes to human health. We probably have a variety of positions regarding certain diets or food groups or nutrients for certain purposes, but ultimately I think we all have a common purpose of learning more about nutrition to improve human health. And anytime I'm in an environment like that, I want to point it out. So anyways, the paper that we'll be talking about today was published last year in Diabetologia, and the title of the study is A Whole Food Plant-Based Intensive Lifestyle Intervention Improves Glycemic Control and Reduces Medications in Individuals with Type 2 Diabetes, a randomized controlled trial. So to get into a little bit of background, we know that diabetes is a global health issue. 11% of adults in the world have diabetes, but some places across the globe are suffering from the disease at substantially higher rates. One of these places is the Republic of the Marshall Islands, which has a diabetes rate of 26%. This is considered the second highest level in the world. And in the picture, you can see where the Marshall Islands are. It's out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, approximately halfway between Australia and Hawaii of the United States. So you might be asking yourself, why? Why the Marshall Islands? What's causing that diabetes rate there? And according to data from the World Health Organization, they have the 7th highest rate of obesity in the world at over 50%. So we know excess body fat contributes to diabetes risk, but what else might be going on here? What might be contributing to the obesity? As with most things regarding human health, it's complex, it's multifactorial. There are historical factors, cultural factors, socioeconomic, geographical factors, etc. And of course, one explanation is diet. The traditional Marshallese diet largely consisted of breadfruit, fish, palm fruits like coconut. And today, most of the Marshallese diet is white rice, canned meats like Spam, instant noodles, and sugary drinks, so largely processed foods. Now, I said at the beginning that we all believe that nutrition is an important factor when it comes to human health, but what about for type 2 diabetes? Can diet really be used to treat it, and what evidence do we have to suggest that? So we know that the more ultra-processed foods that one eats, the greater the risk of type 2 diabetes, and this figure here demonstrates that. But if we switch to looking at whole foods individually, I'll go through some of these panels fairly quickly here, but fruit and vegetable intake is associated with lower type 2 diabetes. And my dissertation actually focused a lot on the effects of fruit on glycemic control. I won't go into that very much today, but in short, fruit may actually be the most effective food group at reducing type 2 diabetes risk, improving glycemia in people with diabetes, and also reducing diabetes complications. And then we have some data from a clinical trial where we gave people type 2 diabetes vary. High doses of fruit that we're going to be publishing soon. Again, that was part of my dissertation. But the best meta-analysis that we have to date shows that fruit reduces hemoglobin A1C in randomized controlled trials, whereas fruit juice actually increases A1C. Same thing is shown for whole grains, which is that it reduces hemoglobin A1C. Legumes reduces both fasting glucose and postprandial glucose, both in people with type 2 diabetes. And there are very few clinical trials actually testing meat intake on glycemic control in people with type 2 diabetes. I was surprised when I was doing the research for this that there aren't a ton of studies out there. However, there was a recent meta-analysis that found that unprocessed red meat, processed meat, and poultry were all associated with higher diabetes risk. So for example, approximately an additional half a serving of these various meat types, type 2 diabetes risk goes up. So anywhere from 50 to 100 grams increases the risk by anywhere from 8 to 15% depending on the type of meat that is consumed. And keep in mind that an average chicken breast or a burger weighs somewhere in the range of 150 to 200 grams on average. And there's even a clinical trial where participants were randomized to eat a control diet or eat the same exact diet, but replace 2 servings of red meat with legumes 3 days a week for 8 weeks. What they found was that in the legume-based group, fasting blood glucose went down significantly more, shown here in yellow, and that fasting insulin was also lower. So considering that both were lower in the legume-based diet, this would suggest improved insulin sensitivity. And just to be complete with kind of most of the major food groups here, I did include data on dairy. This evidence is mixed. Epidemiologic studies suggest that dairy reduces the risk of diabetes, but this could be that people who don't drink milk or don't have much dairy, they're more likely to be drinking sugar-sweetened beverages and or fruit juice, which increase diabetes risk. So when you actually give people dairy and study the effects, fasting glucose levels appear to slightly rise, but A1C levels tend to slightly decline. And there's no effect on HOMA-IR or insulin resistance. So it's possible dairy may have kind of a null effect. Okay, so we've looked at a lot of food groups. What if we start to expand outward into dietary patterns? So this figure is from the Adventist Health Study. The reason I like this study is that for a lot of epidemiologic studies, the criticism is that people who do one harmful behavior are also more likely to do other harmful behaviors. The people who eat a poor diet are probably more likely to drink more alcohol, smoke more, move less, and that's a valid claim. So with the Adventist Health cohort, this is a group of Seventh-day Adventists in North America who are some of the healthiest people in the world. They smoke and drink seldomly, they exercise more than most people, and even their meat intake is quite low. About half of Seventh-day Adventists are vegetarian, and even those who eat meat eat substantially less than the average American. And despite the comorbidity of low meat consumption and all the healthier behaviors, the risk of diabetes is lower as one's diet becomes more plant-based. So what would happen if we create a dietary pattern that kind of follows that reduces processed and animal foods and focuses primarily on plant foods and whole plant foods specifically? Well, most of the randomized controlled trials using plant-based diets are small and or they don't have a very large control group, or they don't have a control group. So here, I'm just going to highlight a couple of the largest randomized controlled trials looking at plant-based diets and diabetes to date. The first one, towards the top here, is a 74-week study with 99 participants that compared a high-carbohydrate vegan diet to a diet that was following what at the time were the American Diabetes Association diet recommendations. They found in this study no differences in A1C, but those on the vegan diet had a significant reduction in diabetes medications. And so when they carried forward the last observation before they actually changed medications, the vegan diet actually did reduce A1C by a significant 0.4% compared to control. And the second one here, it's the largest randomized controlled trial using a whole food plant-based diet to date. And this compared a low carbohydrate vegan diet versus a vegetarian diet, and they found no difference in A1C, but this was only a 12-week study. So thus, there are not a lot of large, long-term randomized controlled trials testing whole food plant-based diets in adults with type 2 diabetes. And as we saw in the last slide, many of these studies are comparing two different diets, and that has its purpose. But it's also important to directly compare a diet, and specifically in this case, whole food plant-based diets, to standard pharmacological therapies. So our objective for this study is to determine the effects of a whole food plant-based diet with moderate exercise on glycemic control and anti-hyperglycemic medication use. So we'll talk about the methods. The study that our team designed is the longest and largest study testing a whole food plant-based diet compared to standard medical care. We enrolled participants with diabetes, type 2 diabetes from the Republic of the Marshall Islands in our study. And as you can see by the 10.4% mean hemoglobin A1C level, these participants overall had very poorly controlled diabetes. We then randomized these participants to 24 weeks of either standard medical care or a plant-based diet and exercise. And as you can see on the bottom right, the intensity of this intervention decreased fairly gradually over the 24 weeks, starting out very intense and then decreasing in intensity as the study went along. So to describe a little bit more about the two groups, the standard medical care, and we had a sample size of 72 in that group, they used glucose-lowering pharmacotherapy, whereas the plant-based and exercise group, we had a sample size of 66 in that group, focused on consuming a whole plant food diet with minimal animal products. We're encouraged to exercise 30 to 60 minutes a day, and this was moderate exercise, so nothing, incredibly intense. And then, as I mentioned before, the intensity decreased gradually from providing 3 meals a day and having 5 to 6 hours a day of group classes in the first couple weeks, the first 2 weeks, all the way down to basically it was essentially a follow-up period during the last 12 weeks with no support during that period of time. And to get give more specifics about the diet, it was a high fiber diet, low in fat, specifically saturated fat, about 10 to 15% protein, and then low sodium. And kind of the key here is that 75% to 100%, so a large majority of people's diets were supposed to be from whole unprocessed plant foods. We looked at a variety of outcomes. So the primary outcomes were glycemic control in nature, a lot of your typical measurements. We also did include type 2 diabetes medication use. And one measure that I want to point out here is the medication effect score. So what this is it's a measurement, a quantitative measurement that reflects the expected improvement in A1C that you would see based on the medication type or the potency of that medication that the participant is taking, or the patient, or in this case, the participant, as well as the dose of that medication. And we looked at cardiovascular risk factors as secondary outcomes, a lot of your typical cardiometabolic endpoints, and we also did look at cardiovascular medication use. And all assessments were taken at weeks 0, 2, 6, 12, and 24. So I'll share some of the results here. This is kind of just our study characteristics at baseline. Average age was 54. 50% of our cohort was, or our sample was female. Average BMI was about 30. A1C, as I mentioned, was 10.4, and the fasting glucose was 232. So again, fairly uncontrolled diabetes. And 61% of our participants were on any type of diabetes medication at baseline. So here are some of the glycemic outcomes. First, you can see the plant-based and exercise group, as I'll call it. They reduced A1C by 0.7% at week 24 compared to control. Though the effects during the more intensive phases of the study were quite large, 1.3% compared to control, and actually got down to 2% compared to baseline. So 2% reduction in A1C by 12 weeks, that is fairly substantial, and it did attenuate a little bit during that follow-up phase, but was still statistically significant. We also found dramatic decreases in fasting glucose as large as 58 milligrams per deciliter compared to standard medical care at week 2. And that was about 72 milligrams per deciliter compared to baseline. So again, a very large, rapid drop. But this effect, again, gradually diminished and was no longer actually significant by week 24. Similarly, the plant-based and exercise group improved insulin initially, as well as HOMA-IR at intermediate time points, but again, not at week 24, so the effects were attenuated. The intervention group also induced remission in 8% of participants versus 0% in the control group or the standard medical care group. And keep in mind that diabetes remission is defined as having an A1C of less than 6.5% for at least 3 months without any anti-hyperglycemic medication use. We also looked at those whose baseline A1C levels were less than 9%. To kind of look at those who maybe had a little bit more controlled diabetes. And we found a 23% remission rate compared to 0% in the control group, though this was not statistically significant. And then if we look at those who just reduced diabetes medications, we had 63% of those in the intervention group reduced diabetes medication versus 28% in the standard medical care group, and the difference was significant there. And then lastly, I talked about that medication effect score, or MES. We did find a significant reduction in that medication effect score measurement at every single time point. So since medications were changed, we then wanted to do another measurement to account for the fact that, when you reduce a medication, A1C might be affected. If you didn't, change that medication, A1C potentially could go down further. And so to adjust for that, we combine hemoglobin A1C and medication effect score. This is essentially the reduction in A1C that you would expect if they didn't have any changes in medication. And you could see the significant reductions at weeks 6, 12, and 24, getting really as low as about 2.5% reduction at week 12. So these are fairly substantial, clinically significant effects. For some of the anthropometric outcomes, we found that participants lost about 2.7 kilograms compared to control. That was fairly modest, I would say. Waist circumference mirrored that. And then CRP, so an indication of inflammation, was significantly reduced at every single time point. When we look at cardiovascular outcomes, we didn't find any changes in lipids at week 24, which was kind of the main time point that we were looking at if we had to pick one. But there were some reductions in total cholesterol and triglycerides at intermediate time points when the intervention was more intensive. And similarly, we found reductions in blood pressure and heart rate in the plant-based and exercise group between weeks 2 and 12. But the effect had waned by the end of the study. But you can still see, a reduction by week 6, for example, in systolic blood pressure of about 10 or 11 points, with the diastolic blood pressure going down about 5 points. So fairly substantial, again, clinically significant reductions in blood pressure initially. And then for medications, 67% of the intervention group reduced their dosage of at least one cardiovascular disease medication compared to only 15% in the standard medical care group. That difference was significant. So those are our results. Couple of strengths about this study. It was a very intensive study, especially initially. The intervention was culturally adapted, which was nice to see. The sample size was large. Remember, this is the largest long-lasting clinical trial looking at the effects of a plant-based, whole food plant-based diet on glycemic control in adults with type 2 diabetes. This was a high priority population. I mentioned the high obesity and diabetes rates at the beginning. And the intervention progressively decreased in intensity. So that allowed us to kind of see a little bit of a dose response. As the intensity of the intervention decreased, so did some of the effects of the outcomes that we were looking at. As far as limitations, that is also a limitation, that there were multiple phases, right? We didn't just have one phase where we could look at the longer term effects of that one particular dose. Adjusting the doses down over time can kind of convolute some of the your conclusions there. And it doesn't give you as nice of data sometimes at week 24, where some of the effects were attenuated a little bit. Also, there were no adherence or diet data that were collected during the study. And there was some contamination of the standard medical care group, and Brenda may speak more about this later, but some of the participants that were in the control group or the standard medical care group, they saw some of the other people who were in the plant-based and exercise group eating, things that maybe they weren't used to people eating, more fruits and vegetables and that type of stuff. And so they kind of wanted to try it. And so there might have been some contamination there. In conclusion, a plant-based diet and exercise, plant-based diet with exercise is superior or was superior in this study to standard medical care at improving specifically A1C, CRP, body weight, waist circumference, while also decreasing diabetes and cardiovascular medications. So seeing endpoints go down while also getting people at reduced or even off of their medications. Additionally, with high adherence to the intervention, we see improvements of nearly every single traditional marker of cardiovascular health or cardiometabolic health. We also found that larger glycemic improvements were larger in this study than in other trials that were investigating plant-based diets. And there could be a few reasons for this. One is the participants in this study had poorly controlled diabetes. And so, our intervention may have changed a very poor diet to a fairly strong diet. And then we provided 3 meals a day early on in the study and also incorporated exercise into the intervention. So it was fairly intensive. And then finally, our intervention emphasized consumption of whole plant foods. Sometimes plant-based diet doesn't necessarily exclude some of the more processed plant foods. Now, this study today that we're presenting on is discussing one particular diet for one particular disease, for one particular population. And so to wrap up, I kind of want to just take a moment, take a few steps back. We have doctors and dietitians. I'm a nutrition scientist, so we have other healthcare professionals, here that obviously want to find ways to help the population improve health, avoid disease, avoid complications from those diseases. In simpler terms, we want people to live long, healthy, enjoyable lives, and diet very much appears to play a role in that. This figure is from a recent Harvard study that looked at the relationship between various food groups and aging healthfully, maintaining cognitive function, physical function, mental health, avoiding chronic disease, and surviving to 70 years old. And notice that the foods on the left panel, I know it can be a little hard to read them, but the foods on the left versus the foods on the panel on the right. On the left, with the green boxes, we're seeing things like fruit, whole grains, vegetables, nuts, legumes, yes, even low-fat dairy. On the right side, with the red boxes, we're seeing foods like alcohol, sweetened beverages, poultry, meats, processed foods. There's a lot left to learn in nutrition research and in medicine, and we can probably even make arguments for why some of these foods don't actually belong where they are. But the data is becoming more and more compelling. If we want people to live longer, healthier lives, a diet with more whole plant foods and with less processed and animal foods does appear the way to go. So I just want to give acknowledgments quickly to the research team, Brenda on the call here, who will talk in just a bit, Dr. Kelly, who was the PI of the study, Dr. Peterson, my mentor, the funding for the study, others, including the Canvasback missions led by Jamie and Jacqueline Spence, the people of the Marshall Islands, specifically the government, and then the Marshallese people and the participants. So before we take questions, I'd like to give the floor, or I guess the screen, to Brenda, who was introduced earlier. She can provide a little bit of context to the research I presented today. She was on the ground there in the Marshall Islands, and I think what she's going to show will enhance our understanding of what things were like in the Marshall Islands and how incredible and impactful this study was to pull off. So without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen and let Brenda share hers.
Thank you so much, Cody. That was an amazing presentation. I really appreciated everything you shared. So thank you so much for that. I will share my screen. There. Can everyone see?
Yeah, perfectly.
Great. Well, there is a little bit of repeat, but I think that's okay. I'm basically bringing you on the ground and telling you what we did in this trial, but also what we did after the trial concluded. And so just my role was as the lead dietitian. I designed the nutrition protocol, the presentations for the program, the recipes, the binder handouts, the cooking classes, and I trained the kitchen and wellness center staff. So we talked about where the Marshall Islands were. So you've seen between Hawaii and Australia, just in the North Pacific above the equator. And there's really no major landmass within a couple of 1,000 miles of any direction. And the Marshalls includes about 1,220 islands, 29 atolls, but the total land area is only 70 square miles. And Majuro, where we did the intervention, is just 3.7 square miles, but it's 30 miles long. The entire Marshallese population in the Marshall Islands is just shy of 39,000, or was in 2023. And in Majuro, they have most of the population with just over 23,000. Now, this is down from a total population of closer to 50 or 60,000 earlier. So people are beginning to move off the islands. And this is, so I said 3.7 square miles for Majuro with a 30-mile long island. So you can see it's just this long, skinny strip of land. It's not terribly arable land. And here's Laura at the end, where a lot of the agriculture happens. So this is the one spot, it's a little wider and they can grow a bit of food, but otherwise there's not a lot of food grown. And here's the atoll from the air, and you can see this is the airport here on the island. And as Cody mentioned, the Marshall Islands is in a state of emergency. They have among the highest prevalence of type 2 diabetes, #2 in the world, and the highest death rates from type 2 diabetes globally. And about 60% of deaths in adults under the age of 60 are attributable to type 2 diabetes and its related comorbidities. And about half of all surgeries on the island are amputations due to diabetes. And if we look at the 1950s, there were only 3 people known to have the disease. And by the 1990s, the prevalence had reached 30% in adults. And by 2000, it was close to 35%. In 2024, the prevalence dropped to 25.7% among individuals 20 to 79. And about 50% of women and half the men are overweight or obese. Now, a century ago, diabetes was pretty much unheard of in the Marshall Islands. People were slim, they were physically active, and they lived off the land. So as Cody mentioned, what they ate was whatever they could catch from the ocean and whatever they could collect from the land. And the primary foods that grow naturally there are coconut, breadfruit, bananas, pandanus, which is a fruit, and of course, whatever green leaves they could collect. And of course, they worked really hard to get these foods. They had to climb the coconut trees and they would do spear fishing to catch their fish. So what happened? And again, just reiterating, there were many factors that contributed to the diabetes epidemic, but urbanization really drove the key culprits, which are an insufficient supply of indigenous, healthy indigenous foods, an increased reliance on imported highly processed foods, and a decline in physical activity. And so the diet changed. And just to give you some images of this, so the little girl on the upper left here, this was 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning. Basically, she's eating breakfast, a can of Pepsi and popsicle. The girl in the middle is a schoolgirl, and she's eating her lunch, which is provided by the school, and it's generally white rice and meat. The favorite snack of the children is ramen noodles with Kool-Aid powder sprinkled on top. And on the right, you see this is a funeral meal. This is a very typical funeral or celebration meal. And it's white biscuits, white bread, white donut, white rice, and then meat. And so refined carbohydrates and meat. And at the bottom left, you see this is a first birthday party. And you can see the huge bins of meat and processed meats are very prevalent. And that's consumed with rice. And this little guy in the picture is drinking this beverage called luau, which is the most popular beverage because it's cheap. Number one ingredient is high fructose corn syrup. So it's basically syrup and colors and flavors. And then, of course, as Cody mentioned, canned meats like Spam are a big part of the diet as well. And of course, the lifestyle changed. So they went from having to work really physically very hard to, having stores to buy their food and restaurants and bars and taxis and so forth. So our team arrived, and this is the original team. When we arrived, we had no facility in which to conduct our research. We had to work with the Ministry of Health to secure a facility. And while we were waiting, I was working on lectures and handouts and recipes and so forth. But just to give you an idea of the team here, this is me, and this is Dr. The senior man here is Dr. Ralph Harris, and then the two younger guys on the outside are administrative and build out staff. And then behind me is my husband and my son, who came along to assist. And we finally did get our building, and what we were given was right beside the hospital to the left on this picture. This building was the TB and leprosy clinic, and we were given this clinic to transform into a diabetes research facility. We did the build out on our own, and I have to tell you, this facility was in disarray. It had literally become overrun with rats and cockroaches. The stainless steel medical cabinets had 2 inches of rat droppings. And so we basically had to strip the building and do a complete build out. And we ordered everything we needed, appliances, kitchen implements, all of that. And I was basically the cook and chief bottle washer for the team. During the time, I was the only female. I prepared all the food on a 2-burner cooktop stove for the 9 people that were involved in doing the build out. And as Cody mentioned, this was a very culturally sensitive program, and we were all trained in local traditions and customs, and the emphasis was placed on understanding cultural beliefs about health, food, medicine, healing, and respecting and integrating traditional knowledge, values, and cultural frameworks. And you can see here, this is our head cook, Rosanna, and she was taking me out to acquire an appropriate wardrobe. And she taught me a lot about the traditions of the Marshall Islands. And our delivery was also very culturally sensitive. It included trained Indigenous Marshallese and Canvasback mission staff. This is Dr. Yosef, and he was a key player in our program. The Marshallese were really involved at every level of decision making. And we developed culturally appropriate menus. Of course, menus were plant-based, which was pretty new for participants. So our recipes were developed in consultation with Marshallese staff to include familiar traditional foods like the breadfruit, taro, pandanus, local bananas, local pumpkin and coconut, to include plant-based versions of local favorites, and to feature textures and seasonings that were familiar and comfortable. The diet design, I think Cody already went through this, so I will just say very quickly that it was a whole food plant-based diet that was high in fiber, moderate in sodium. We really focused on concentrating the protective components in the diet, like phytochemicals and antioxidants, and fat was moderate, and most of the fat came from whole foods like nuts and seeds. And post-intensive, we did allow the participants to consume fish, but we asked them not to fry it. It needed to be either steamed, boiled, or baked. And some participants did choose to eliminate fish for the entire program, but most did add fish back because it's such a culturally relevant food for that population. So what did the participants eat? Well, this is what breakfast looked like. It was intact grains like barley porridge or muesli, which when they were doing their breakfasts at home, we taught them to do muesli, which is soaked porridge with the unsweetened soy milk. We always served beans and greens at breakfast, plenty of fruit, and it was all topped with walnuts and omega-3 rich seeds. Once in a while, we would do something like a scrambled tofu. Lunch was usually salads and soups, so that was the focus there. And dinners, we actually tried to keep concentrated carbohydrates fairly low at dinner to help with that postprandial glycemic response, and this helped tremendously. So we did things like chili with, vegetables and beans, and stir fries with vegetables and tofu. And this middle salad with the noodles is actually edamame noodles. So it's legume-based noodles and vegetables. And then on the right, it's a gado with tofu or tempeh and veggies and peanut sauce. And on the bottom right is a curry with chickpeas and non-starchy vegetables. And the bottom middle is a lentil nut loaf, and instead of potatoes, it was turnips and carrots. So you get the idea. And our participants actually prepared their own dinners. So we had cooking classes where they learned to prepare these foods. And we partnered with local grocery stores so that they would provide more healthy foods to the population. We did shopping tours regularly. But one of the biggest challenges for people as they tried to bring the program home was the challenge of affordable produce, because the produce there is very expensive. It has to be shipped a long way because there's just not enough land to grow produce for everyone. So soil quality is poor, local farming is limited, but the growing season is year-round and sunshine is plentiful in the Marshall Islands. So we taught people to grow plants in earth boxes. And so they would regularly harvest the produce out of earth boxes to bring home and use in their food preparation. We turned every crack and crevice of the hospital that was available into gardening spaces. And we taught our participants to grow sprouts as well. And so just a few other program details. We did education sessions with every day of our intervention, teaching about healthy lifestyles, food and nutrition, exercise, stress management, gardening, of course, dental health, care of eyes and feet, and medical management. And the man in this picture is Dr. Kamal, and he was the surgeon. He was the man that did the amputations. And so he was there teaching people what they needed to do to avoid amputation. So we involved several physicians in this education program. And just to tell you a little bit more about the exercise, the favorite things to do were cardio, dance, and strength classes. And so those were the key features of our exercise program. But one of the most important aspects of the program was walking after meals. So after every single meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, our participants walked. And they walked maybe for 10 or 15 minutes. After dinner, it was usually 20 to 30 minutes. And we found that made such a difference in their glycemic response after meals. And so now I want to share just a little bit about our ongoing efforts since the randomized control trial came to a close. So we continued our partnership with the Ministry of Health and the Marshall Islands government. We continue to operate the Wellness Center, and it continues to this day. One of the things we did was add a little restaurant to the center to help bring in enough funds to pay our Marshallese staff. And we continue to do interventions at the Wellness Center. We did several little community outreach programs. This one was in 2010, where we brought in the head diabetes person from the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And we went to schools and churches and taught the children about healthy eating. And then in 2014, we came and did interventions in Ibai and Madro. And Ibai is the second largest island. It's only an area of 0.1 4 square miles, population of just over 10,000 people. So very crowded island. And we brought our Marshallese team to help with the intervention, of course. And we got amazing results. Average fasting glucose dropped in our Majro intervention almost 120 milligrams per deciliter, and the average after glucose drop was 68. And it was the opposite in EBI. The average fasting glucose drop was 50 milligrams per deciliter, and after exercise drop was 116 milligrams per deciliter. And then in 2017, I was invited back to develop a nutrition education curriculum for the public school system. And I brought a friend with expertise in dealing with school-age children. And this is her name is Margie. And we did teacher training. We trained every single teacher in the public school system as well. And the kids loved it. We had a lot of fun with them. And then in 2024, I returned with my son, and we did training for the wellness center staff. And we did education for the president, and this is President Heine in the middle here. And on the left is Jackie Spence from Canvasback Missions and myself. And we trained the staff, we trained the president and her staff on plant-based, plant-centered way of eating. And our success really inspired changes in the country. Stores are stocking a more extensive supply of healthy options. Restaurants are offering wellness-approved meals. Schools have adopted a nutrition curriculum developed by the Wellness Center, and walking is encouraged. We see walkathons all the time. And I think this all culminated with the government's 2025 Healthy Living Guidelines, which is just an amazing thing to see there. So that's the end of my presentation. And